Hello, everyone. This is Tim, my friend who is from Mozambique, and I wanted to be in a conversation with him. I wanted to have a conversation with him about art and symbols and identity, and also how those symbols make positive change, or how we can experience those symbols making positive change in the world. And Tim is an incredible photographer, and uh, he has worked with the UN, yes, and created two books, right? Two books of photography, of photos, um, and the power of those symbols. I know I have a couple of those symbols in my home, and those images in my home, and so also his work is um, in being a father and a partner and a husband, and is also working with Alma there in Mozambique, and Tofu, and is an incredible artist. I mean, just about anything you lay your hands on becomes a sculpture, or you build beauty and safety and home from all of these places that you go, and all of these people, these human beings, and create community in ways that are so powerful. And so I wanted to begin in that way, and then I'm going to. It's so funny. Like I turned it off, my phone off, but it's like still dinging, right? It's just like, okay, I guess Spirit's like saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" So I wanted to start with, there's a quote by Carl Jung, where he talks about how the symbol is the mechanism that transforms the unconscious. And when I look at your work, or when I see your images, we have an image of Sudan that you took. That's that beautiful blue sky, and the power of the desert, and it's like I feel like I'm levitating in the middle of that blue sky over the land there, and there's this power of the symbol to change us. And so I feel that way in your images, and I'm really curious about what led you to those specific ways of expressing yourself, or what really called you to bring the symbol into form in that way.
Well, thank you, Char, for that beautiful and generous introduction. Very grateful to be here sitting with you and sharing this conversation, and with whoever is joining us. So thank you for joining us. I think initially for me, photography was a vehicle. I think first was to search for my own identity. So growing up, I grew up in the East Coast in New Jersey, and my father is Slovak, mother is Irish, of Irish heritage and Slovak heritage. And so growing up in a different culture, you're always kind of searching to try and understand where you come from, where are your people from, where are your ancestors from. And so that was kind of the start of my journey. So photography, I actually started out photographing skateboarding as my friends.
Oh my gosh.
And so I grew up skateboarding, and that was my community. This is 35, 40 years ago. So this is way before skateboarding was X Games and a very cool thing. It was still very much a subculture, and a subculture that was seen as something not great. It was rebellious, but there's nothing wrong with that, of course. That's wonderful. But so when I first traveled to Ireland and Northern Ireland when I was just finishing high school, and as I traveled anywhere, the first place was always the skate shop and the record shop, because that's where I'd find my people. I'd find friends, and I'd find community there. And in Northern Ireland, this is still in the midst of the conflict before the signing of the peace accord. Violence and division was everywhere. It was sectarianism. And what I found was, as with everywhere else, the skateboarders were the ones that didn't give a damn about that.
Oh, wow.
So Catholics and Protestants living in very rough. I mean, the first place I stayed, there were 2 houses left. The rest of it looked like it was after a war, and it was just really just kind of a squat. But these were people that, despite growing up in where they were taught to distrust and to hate each other, that they found commonality, and they did that through skateboarding. They did that through art. They did that through creativity. And so that was where I kind of started, and then began that journey and continued. So
and then you went to school in New York. That's where you kind of made a choice to.
I did, yeah. So then I did art school in New York, graduated from School of Visual Arts, but it was much more, it was a place that I was going, but my knowledge and my learning was outside of that, those walls, shall we say.
For sure.
So it was always through travel, through new experiences, but I always had this desire to look outward and to try and understand other places, because growing up in this society, you have this opportunity, but there's so much else that's going on in the world, and I had this need to know. So I started living in New York from when I was 20 years old, and finished university there. I started trying to build up, and each year I would save a little money and go on a trip. And so one year it was Northern Ireland, the next year it would be Cambodia, the next year it was India.
Interesting.
And so kept trying to find and searching for a deeper understanding, I think, is what I was looking for. And so that's continued throughout my life. I've found different ways to express myself. I started making furniture in New York and learned other creative trades and crafts and other ways to express and to create, because the idea of creation, the idea of being able to create something from nothing is what is inspiring to me. So yeah.
And that's what we're here to do too, is I feel that that we're here to create something, and to, not to say legacy, but to give a legacy, or to, give something that has meaning and heart and depth and love and feeling in it. And I see that in your work. And so I'm wondering what called you to the work with the UN, and where were you in your life at that time? What was it that brought the two of you together?
Well, that was so. Prior to that, I was working as a freelance photographer in New York, based in New York. So,
journalist,
yeah,
doing journal, yeah,
and worked for a couple of newspapers, photo agency, and so that was where. So I would go out, I would take trips, I would go try and do this. Sometimes there would be stories, and I saw through a friend that there was an opening and applied for the job. I had no expectation that it would be such a significant part of my life's journey, but it turned out to be something that was entirely transformative. So in 2006, I ended up landing in Khartoum, and I was there as the photographer based in the southern Sudan at the time, which was in the midst of conflict. The war had just ended, but was still for all intents and purposes, there were all the leftovers, all the hangovers from that. And so it was my job to tell that story. And the way I saw it was that I was there to tell a story for the Sudanese people, and to tell a story that other people could not. And so for the next 5 years, I worked at the UN, ran the photography department, and it was this privilege really to have the time and to not have to be taking a commercial approach to what I was trying to cover, and to be able to try to tell the stories that maybe otherwise would not. So, and that was, it was an identity-driven conflict. You had a northern elite that was dominating the politics, and so there had always been conflict between the periphery, between the other communities, the other ethnicities within Sudan, who are outside of what the government saw as the ideal Sudanese. And so that always led to conflict. And so that issue of identity was one that has kind of resonated through everything that I've done. And not inconsequentially, when I arrived in Sudan, I met the love of my life, and we've built over the last 18 years a family together and a beautiful life together. So just to mention that, that's also serious.
It's definitely on my list of things to talk about.
But also a serious thing about how it went from thinking I was going for a year and then I'd come back to New York and resume the life that I was living to something very different.
Yeah.
And so where I went, and that became, okay, this is the place I'm supposed to be, and the work I'm supposed to be doing right now.
And your partner, Anyeth, you and Anyeth met. Did you meet in Sudan, or did you?
We did.
Okay.
So,
I thought I remembered that you'd met.
Yeah,
there,
it was a pretty intense story. So we met, so actually on my first day arriving in Southern Sudan, we met briefly because her cousin was working in my office. She was working as a human rights officer. She's a human rights lawyer. And I went around, introduced myself to everybody, said these are the things that I'm looking to do and what I'm hoping to do, and wanted to understand from those who were expert in the country, had been there. I obviously didn't know much, but I had an openness and needed to understand. And the next day, that evening, there was an attack on a village just across the river. So the next morning she said, this, you said yesterday you wanted to do these things. This happened. I'm about to go. Do you want to come? We went out. We spent the next 2 weeks tracking this whole series of attacks that were deadly attacks taking place. And so that's how we met and came together first as colleagues, and then later as more than that.
Yeah, and she is the precious human in my world. I'm so grateful for her medicine and energy and gifts. So when I'm thinking about these images, I'm thinking about, well, the images. It's really interesting how this art like guided you to different countries and to different places and into conflicts and into being a lens within those conflicts, a healing lens, or maybe not even a healing lens, but just a bold, honest, something honest happening. I mean, this is because with a photograph, it's a flash of what's actually happening. It's a moment of what's actually happening. And so, and of course we can look at it from a million different perspectives, and it can be seen from a million different perspectives. But to me, it really, there's a truth in photography that that other arts, they have a different lens and a different truth that they can tell. And so I just think that the truth that it tells is very powerful. And so in that truth, I'm just curious what emerged for you around the changes within yourself that you saw. But what kind of changes did you see from the art itself, or from the photographs that you put out into the world? What did you experience or notice, or what emerged for you as you began putting the images sharing what you were seeing into the
Mm.
world. What did you
Well,
notice?
I think it's the responsibility of honestly telling someone's story,
Mm.
because it is a moment in time, but it's one person's perspective on that moment in time. And so that can be manipulated, and you can choose how to frame something, how to
Right.
what you choose to put in, but what you choose to leave out as well is extremely important. And and you can see that in so many images where you think you're looking at one thing, but you're not. And what's being left out of that image, what's just out of frame, would totally change your perception of what you're seeing. And so that sort of responsibility, for me, it was always, someone was trusting me, because oftentimes you're coming in to someone who's experiencing the worst moment in their life, or one of, a death, a murder, something. It can be at a funeral for your husband. It can be any of these things. It can be your child who's just been killed. And you are there, and you're there to tell that story. They're permitting you to tell that story because they think it's going to make something better. That is the agreement. And so it's something that it's a heavy responsibility. And so it's about honesty. It's about, how do I try and capture this moment in a way that is honest and moral for myself, but is also what is true to that person. And to try and, so that is always something that has been in my mind about how the decisions I make, when what I choose to show and what I choose to share.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm thinking about, I appreciate what you just said about to make things better. Like the whole intention is to make things better. And, what are the ways in which you've seen that? And what are the ways, and what are some of your, I don't want to really use the word hope, but a tenuous hope, like, and what are your hopes?
I think in some ways it's, that's really a hard one, because I think often, you can go in, especially when you're younger, you go in and think, me bearing witness is really going to do something that changes this situation. And I should do this because it's actually going to help that person. But very often it doesn't. It's not doing much of anything for that person. Sometimes it does. But that's really the hard thing, is if you're going there, is it serving a purpose? Are you truly serving a purpose, irrespective of what you're trying to do? What you're trying to do is great, but if it's not actually if it's not doing what you intend, and you're at a funeral and you're there, and is bringing that story going to improve? Are you going to do something, and is it going to make a difference? And so that's something that, over times you can get to a point where you feel like, it's really not. And you feel like you're no longer doing it. And it's, to go into this, and I'm not trying to say that it's not important. It is.
Right.
It is important. But you also have to be clear about the impact you can have and what you're able to do, and to be truthful and honest with the people that are allowing you into their lives, because it's their lives. I am there to bear witness, or to share, or to see, but they are opening their lives and their pain and their suffering to the world in a way that most people would never be comfortable with. And they're doing that based on trust. And so that is kind of a sacred bond there, in the sense of, if you're going to allow me in, I have to be able to do something in a way that is honest. It's just, that is the basis of it. It has to be doing it honestly. I will do the best that I can to represent that story, to share that story, and hopefully it makes a difference. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
It's interesting. I think one of the important things that I remember one of my mentors, Angela Sarian, said is, she says that where we are witnessed, well, whatever we witness, we're changed by. And wherever we're witnessed, there's no going back to the old way. And so I think that there is the power of this, I'm going to call it artist's prayer, and the power of this connection to the yearning around creating this exchange and this bond and this trust. But I'm also curious about, you have transformed this now, these images. It's so interesting because I think of how those images, now you are married to, a Sudanese woman, and, and you're like, those images changed you. Like, it's that, those images, it's like he says, what Carl Jung says about how that symbol shapeshifts our own unconscious and changes us.
Yeah.
And I believe that right now we're receiving so many images that we don't have choices about. Or, I mean, even the gas station, like here in Seattle, I've gone to gas stations and there's actually a little TV screen in the gas pump.
Yep.
And it is, and you can't turn it down, you can't turn it up. Because I'm always like, oh, I could just turn this off, and you actually can't do that. So, and it's firing images at you. And if these images are symbols that shapeshift the unconscious, it's just, I find it really interesting what's going into our unconscious from that firing of all of these images. And so what are your thoughts about how we can work with that, and about, how can we bring things into and create symbols, and also for other artists or for other activists and people who are wanting to create some, in a good way, in a sacred manner, some positive change through their gifts. Just what comes to your heart when I'm talking about that?
Yeah, I mean, this constant bombardment. I remember when they put TVs in the New York taxis, and there's just, you have no moment of peace.
Yeah.
So you're just going at any moment as if we don't have enough screens. But yeah, it's I think there was, and that, what I was talking about before, about sometimes feeling that your work isn't really, you go into a place of sometimes horror, sometimes beauty. And how do those images make a difference? And how do you, so for me, when I was looking after some years, and, I arrived in Sudan, the first thing I wanted to do is go as many places as possible. And whatever the biggest story, I have to go straight there. I have to do this, I have to do that. And this just happened. This conflict broke out there, let's go straight there. This conflict broke out, let's go straight there. And, or these people were displaced, or whatever it was. But what I, in the end, as I started to kind of think about what was the impact of the work that I was doing, and started to think about who is my audience being Sudanese people, and the fact that so few of them had the opportunity to interact with each other, and that there was a way or what I hoped would be that the work that I was doing, looking at the Sudanese people in totality and all of the, I mean, you have 400 different communities, like 1,000 languages. It's insanely diverse. And from the desert to the rainforest, from the sea to, you know, it's everything. It was the biggest country in Africa at the time. And that is, for those that aren't as familiar, is the size of the United States east of the Mississippi, that single country. And so Africa is much bigger and much more diverse than people think it is because of the maps that we look at.
Spectacular. Yeah, it's
and
really,
that's
just in my very limited experience. It's three. I think, how many did we visit together?
Three countries.
South Africa,
Eswatini and Mozambique. And it's just a tiny corner.
It's like, oh my God, like the diversity, even in the landscape, and one is hills and the other is like,
then to
criaturas,
from the mountains to the sea, and we're just in this tiny little part of it. And so being able to go around and to see all of the country, it made me think of the journey people are on in terms of their own identity, but also what was being lost in terms of, so Sudan was on the verge of splitting. So the South was going to secede, and the North would be what was left of Sudan would be called Sudan, and South Sudan was the new country. And this was something that many had fought for. Many others had fought to transform Sudan into a different type of country, a more inclusive country, and did not want to secede. They wanted to create a different Sudan, a new Sudan. That's what it was called. And so when I was looking at those years that I spent there and the documenting of it, it was, okay, I'm looking and I'm having the privilege to travel around a place that will no longer exist. And so it was almost like, as one person described it, as my love letter to Sudan.
Oh, yeah.
And in a way it was, because it was, going through and trying to, the 25 states, to be able to travel through them, the different communities, and to combine that with the history and the poetry and the writings of Sudanese about who they are and who they see themselves at this kind of monumental moment when where they will end up will change. And, in the end, divisions, dividing a political or a geographic area, it doesn't necessarily solve the problems, because since that, that was in 2011, the countries, they became two separate countries. We now have the worst civil war, one of the worst civil wars in the world, going on right now in Sudan. 9 million children are malnourished and starving, displaced. And the South has suffered greatly. So that wasn't the solution. It was a solution, but it didn't solve the problem. And so, I don't know if I answered your question.
I appreciate. No, I don't know if it's a question, but more of a conversational kind of thing happening. But yeah, I'm thinking about just, it's like one day at a time. It just kind of, I think, boils down to, planning well and preparing well as we can, but also, what can we do today? What simple things, and the simplicity and complexity of taking a single frame in the place that you were at in that time. But also, I just wonder about, these places of separation that we are creating through our acts, and where are the places where we can, what is your vision for unity? What is your vision for, how can we go forward? And is it more of this, do what we can do today? How can we be closer to the earth and the earth's needs, and closer to each other? And, I see community, being in community is, a curative for us right now, and knowing each other and being together. So I'm just curious about your thoughts, what your vision is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we need to meet each other and to learn from each other and respect each other. And that was one of the things that I saw there, in terms of, it's so easy to demonize someone that you do not know and someone that you haven't met. And so you make tons of assumptions. And so I had done an exhibition and had in Sudan before the independence. And I put up all these photographs, and people came, and it was remarkable because people are like, oh my God, they look just like us. And these are their neighbors. These are the same communities. They're different communities, but they shared a similar history. But this idea from, because people hadn't had the opportunity to meet, hadn't had the opportunity to share themselves or to understand each other, it's very easy to assume that we're wildly different and that those people are not like us. They don't share our values. They don't think like us. They don't act like us, because they must be different because I don't know them. And so that, creating those places of understanding, and that was really what I was hoping to accomplish there, was to share together with, that which I had the opportunity to see, which, because of there's no transport links and the finance to travel around is impossible. It's not somebody doesn't want to do it. It's not a lack of will. It's a lack of opportunity. But then there's a lot of people who have a lack of will, and those people need to, make the step. And those with a lack of opportunity it's a little bit of a different story, because, but it was really interesting, because one of the things so when I did the first book, there was, we had some that were damaged. So there were some that were unable to be given out to certain ones. And I would always carry a box of them around. And wherever I would go, wherever I would travel, I would give them out. I would give them to the rickshaw driver, which is like the little whatever. If I had to go to the pharmacy, I'd give it to the pharmacist. If I had to go to the market, I'd give it to whoever I was talking to. And every single person that I gave it to would do two things. So the first thing they would do would be open that book and try and find themselves in it. And to go through it and to say, where am I? This is supposed to be a book about Sudan. Where am I? But once they found themselves in the book, they went back to the beginning, and then they looked through it, because they knew they were already there. And so they knew that, and that happened with everyone's from somewhere. So you go in, oh, where are you from? And I'm from El Obeid, I'm from this, I'm from wherever. Okay. This is when I visited El Obeid. Wonderful. And then once you had that knowledge in yourself that you have been represented, you've not been excluded from what is supposed to be a document of a broad and huge society, you're open to engaging with what other people's experiences. And so that was a real important lesson and it was something that was such an interesting, and it became my favorite thing about the book. It was just to go
to give it out,
just to give it away.
Yes,
but give it away, not to government, not to give it out to people who lack that opportunity, who didn't have the chance to go to place to place to place to place. And that was a very important thing to learn and to understand and to see. And so that's really that idea of inclusion, that idea of representation, and how important that is to your ability to see new things, learn new things. It then defined and integrated that into the work that I did going forward. So
thank you. Thank you, Tim. This is just so amazing. It's such a blessing. I feel like this just what a beautiful gift. Then the other thing is I feel like, the bridge building, or kind of the bridge of the book is maybe how I would say it is, or the books. I feel like then, you and Agnes creating Roots, and, and the beautiful women that I had the holy privilege and opportunity to work with, and the work that we did there, and to make friends. And I feel like that has happened with Roots, and that different people from different places and from different perspectives and views, like we all came together, and we all did our trauma work together. We all were making our genealogical maps. We all were talking about, our own history, and like forging a way together through that work, and the mind-body work. And so could you speak a little bit about Roots?
So I mean, this was in 2009, Agnes founded the Roots Project. And so this was also about people's needs. And so she had come from human rights law and went there to document but kind of that same thing I was speaking of earlier, in terms of you go and people share their worst moments with you, with the expectation that is going to make some change. And then you go back and you file the report and you write the report, and it doesn't get released. Nobody reads it. Something happens. It's edited out because it doesn't fit within the political motivation or the ideas that they're trying to put forward. And so it becomes almost like, are you lying to people? Are you saying, this is something that I'm going to do, but what they need is basic needs, and it's their basic needs. And how do you expect people to stand up for their human rights or to understand such things if they can't feed themselves or their families and their kids, and they have no safety and they have none of these things? And so she wanted to, and we wanted to, create a situation where people could come together across divisive tribal lines where conflict was existing, but that they could sit in community, do so by utilizing traditional practices of beadwork, learning from each other, create a sense of community there, but also give them the strength and the income to support their families. And then once they have those basic needs met, then you can start working towards how do these people, how are you empowered to make a difference? Because you need to have that structure, that base. And that community was just so essential when the war broke out. It started in 2009 or 2008 rather. And then in 2013, the war broke out. People live in very, so you have this community lives in this area, this community lives in this area, this community lives in this area. And most people don't know many outside of their own community. But the women of the Roots Project did. They had built relationships across communities. So when conflict erupted in one neighborhood, that would encompass most of that community that lived in Juba, the capital of South Sudan. And if you only knew people within your community, you didn't have anywhere to run.
Oh.
Because where would you go?
Right.
Where would you go? Everyone,
course.
you're in a place, the conflict is centered around your area and you have nowhere to go. But the women had another place to go. They could go to places outside. And that community allowed them to stay strong through economic collapse, through all these things, COVID, all these things that just decimated the society. They were able to continue to bridge that gap. And this is an organization that now has 110 women and has been going for 15 years. And it was, I think the other very important thing it was to take a cultural heritage, a cultural legacy. There it was beadwork. In Mozambique, we work with pottery.
Yeah.
And other sorts of traditions, because this is something where you already have, the skills are existing. The skills have been devalued. But that is your communal pride. That is your ancestry. That is your history. And so to be able to share that is sharing a bit of yourself. And so it's a different form. It's not just earning an income. It's earning an income in community while sharing your history and your culture, and to have that be celebrated. It builds pride and it builds strength. And so when I first went, like, I'm jumping around a bit, but in Mozambique, when we first went down there and first started talking to the potters there, and it was, oh, nobody cares about it because it's been replaced. And it was only older women, mostly destitute, who were there and selling things for nothing, really, just enough to make a cup, just sell it for the price of bread, and to do that. And then it was a situation where no one valued the work that they were doing, or they felt that no one valued the work that they were doing. And so in this transformation and working together, working in community with them, and it's something that now we bring it to the US, we bring it around the world. People now come to visit, and people come from all over the world to sit and visit with them. And so that's a totally different perspective to have about you're creating something that is not only just a little bit of income. It's not just to support. It's something that is sharing yourself and your culture, and people appreciate it. And that's really a change. That's something that's transformative, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of cups. My two favorite cups are from, and I remember that there was a class that we had the class when I was there, and just sitting there and learning, being taught how to make it, and it was, and the laughter and the play and the seriousness of it also. But it was definitely. It was a sacred interaction for me, and humbling and lovely, and and so how can people find out more about Roots, or what could they do to participate or donate? Or
so there's a website for the Roots. The Roots project is based in South Sudan, so the website is called therootsofsouthsudan.org. In Mozambique, you can come visit us.
It's so great.
We're still, right now we're producing there. We're not exporting. But we're just doing it in a way that is sustainable, which is the other very important thing about that. We want to be able to create, and it's not for us to create, it's for us to work together with people to create something. And so it's always done in partnership. If it's not done in partnership, it will not last. And so trying to look towards creating a sustainable future for these organizations, and one that we can then hand over so it becomes something that is owned by the community. That is really the ultimate goal.
Thank you, Tim, so much. And we are going to Mozambique. I'm doing, bringing a trip,
Awesome.
bringing a group. So we'll be coming there in October of next year
Yep.
to have a retreat, a 10-day retreat there, and to experience many of those wonderful things.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here with me today and for being willing to have this conversation. And I feel blessed by your presence in my life.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Char,
Yeah.
and thank you for listening, and just so grateful to know you and to spend time with you, and eager to welcome you again to our home as we've been welcomed here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Char.